Welcome back. In a moment, we'll be discussing China's imperial past. But first, here are some other stories to keep an eye on. 11 soldiers have been killed by friendly fire in the Philippine city of Marawi. Over the past week, militants allied to Daesh have engaged in running street battles with the army, leaving more than 150 dead. Socialist Zoran Zaev has been appointed Prime Minister of Macedonia, ending almost 6 months of political deadlock there. Macedonia has been without a functional government since 2015. Zaev's Social Democrats have formed a coalition with parties representing the country's ethnic Albanians. And America has signed trade deals with Vietnam worth an estimated $8 billion. Vietnam has been attempting to solidify its business relationship with America ever since Donald Trump pulled out of the Asia-Pacific Trade Pact earlier this year. Communist Vietnam has been an important partner with the U.S. as both countries share concerns about China's rising power. Earlier in the program, we talked about China's plan for a new Silk Road, a project to spend billions of dollars on building projects to cement, literally, its new place in the world. But what was its place in the world when the original Silk Road existed and emperors ruled the country from the Forbidden City? To find out, I'm joined by Lars Lahmann, who is a lecturer in history of China at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Good to have you.
Yes. Hello.
China's history. We've got a few minutes to discuss 5,000 years of it. Where do you want to start?
I would like to start with the name which the Romans in Latin gave to the Chinese. Namely, they called them Ceres, which means the silk people. And this gives us a clue as to what the major export item was of the Chinese empires from the Roman period onwards. So we're talking about 2,000 years, the Han Dynasty in China, the Roman Republic, actually, in the Mediterranean. I come equipped with Chinese silk, which is, of course, that was a trade secret. It was very tightly guarded, and it took several hundred years before bishops belonging to the Byzantine Empire, so in nowadays Turkey, smuggled out the silkworms in their walking sticks.
Incredible.
And therefore actually exported a trade secret which then no longer was so secret anymore.
What a great bit of history and detail that I didn't know about. You know, we talk about two Chinas, one of being closed, retreating, disengagement from the outside world. It was certainly that during Mao's time. But before that, if you really take a look at its long history, it was anything but closed.
It's true. It's to the Chinese, to the East Asians, especially to the Central Asians, China was a transit territory. From the western end of the Eurasian landmass, it's always regarded as a hard stop. That's where all the trade went. That's where in the 620s, so in the times of the Prophet Muhammad, one of his companions, Sa'd ibn Waqqas, where he arrived and founded one of the first mosques outside Arabia, sorry. Mm-hmm. And this is just indicative of the density of trade links that existed between the Eastern Mediterranean, between the Arabian Peninsula, the Red Sea, India, and southern China. But as I said, China is just a transit territory because all the traders who arrived in say the Tang capital during the from the 7th to the 10th centuries, they made their way further to the east. Goods that arrived from the west, from Western Asia, from Asia Minor, from the Mediterranean, they would eventually end up in Korea and in Japan.
And then even when you advance the clock forward a little bit, I mean, if you take a look at Shanghai, for instance, when it was being called the Paris of the East, and when I was reading in this, there was a lot of different cities that made the claim they were the Paris of the East, but Shanghai certainly probably deserved the label more than any others. The Americans were there. There was a French quarter, a British quarter. I mean, China was extremely international.
That's right. Of course, that's where the controversy starts, because the treaty ports which were being established after the First Sino-British War, so in 1840, the Treaty of Nanjing, they had a special legal status, namely they excluded anybody from Chinese jurisdiction. they were extraterritorial. That meant that anyone who committed a crime needed to be judged according to foreign law. Now, is this something new? Yes or no? No, because
that's
already
what the Americans have imposed in other places as well.
Maybe, but if we go back again to the Sung period, or even before that in the Tang, that really begins. You have cities in the south of China, four major trading ports where the Middle Eastern traders get their own jurisdiction. They're extraterritorial. So this is something which in the modern period is simply copied.
I can tell you're a professor of history. It's great to hear some of the history and the detailed history that you know about. Roll in the Opium Wars for me and explain that to people, what happened.
Well, that is precisely the issue which caused the First Sino-British War. The major export over the centuries was silk, but at some point, tea replaced this. I don't know whether you can see this. This is a tea brick. It contains solid tea, which was transported by camels across the land route, but increasingly also by ship. And the main switch came when in the it's sweet, I know. When in the
did you get this from China?
Yes, I got this from China.
And you carried it back. And
yes.
You brought it just to insight for us. It's very kind.
Of course, to share it with humanity.
All right. I'm sorry, carry on.
But the switch really occurred when in the 18th century, the better off classes, the petite bourgeoisie, began to develop a taste for teas, but then also New World products and also coffee. But tea became the weapon which the Victorians would then use in order to decouple the British industrial workers from alcohol, because that was up until the early 19th century the only drink that was safe, because drinking water couldn't be drunk, so people drank beer. If you couple alcoholic drinks with modern machines, you get accidents, and that's why the switch to tea happened. In order to pay for this tea, the Chinese demanded payment in silver. So you had all these galleons of silver Spanish silver dollars, going from Europe and the Americas all the way into China. So China was called the silver grave of the world.
And then opium.
Opium became the substitute for silver. And it was not the East India Company, the British East India Company, as it's often said, but it was actually the traders who started trading, bartering, if you like, opium for tea and other commodities. And this takes place from roughly the 1790s onwards, definitely from 1800. And from that time onwards, the British are in clear violation of Qing, of Chinese legislation, and a war is being declared, not on the British, but on opium.
Let's end where we started the program, and that is this new Silk Road that China is building, going back to the old Silk Road. What do you think is really behind it?
There are at least three dimensions to this. The first one is nostalgic, because China sees itself as one of the great engines of the world economy. And if you talk to economic historians, this is certainly the case.
That's number one. Number two?
Number two is a very real and present-day need for trade, because, of course, China has been expanding at exponential rates. This is beginning to stall, or it's stalled already twice, and the consequences each time when this happened were immediately palpable. I mean, I can probably refer to the happenings of 1989 when we had the Tiananmen massacre. That was during a time of economic stagnation, and the Chinese leadership want to prevent that at any cost.
Sure they do. And then number three, just international influence.
The third one is a presence in the world, and this presence is symbolized through hardware such as railways, of course. Railways become a major export item for the Chinese economy. Railways are less offensive than military equipment.
That's for sure.
Military equipment is also being sold. China is one of the greatest trading nations in anything that is military.
And it's really that political influence,
hardware, and that harks back to the first dimension. Was China ever a colonial power? Was it an imperial power? And the answer is yes, definitely. If you look at the expansion of the Han Dynasty, that's the first one, the Tang Dynasty, Qing, it's all westwards, and it follows the same route.
Sure, and even the U.S. is concerned about what kind of influence China is looking to project here. Lars, great to have you on the show. We end with our Insight Bite, a little something that we feel that you should know. The vision of creating a transport system that can carry passengers above ground at 1,200 kilometers an hour, faster than the speed of sound, has moved a step closer to reality. With the help of several investors, a Dutch team has built a 30-meter Hyperloop tube and is preparing to fit it with rails and a shuttle. A Hyperloop is a craft that travels on magnetic rails, somewhat like a train, but which runs in a tube with little or no air, except for the passengers. They need that. The idea is the brainchild of Elon Musk's SpaceX, which hopes to develop super-fast transport technology and is in the process of setting up a full-scale testing center, 1,200 kilometers an hour. That's all for now. I'm Dana Lewis, and that was Insight.